It's Crossing the Line by Angus McSeaver. Today I will demonstrate Chapter 27, The Christians to the Lions. In this chapter, there aren't any questions on the story, or development exercises, or interesting facts. Therefore, I will read the chapter for you. For more details on the chapter and for online classes, please comment below or WhatsApp the show number on the thumbnail. Let's get started. The Christians to the Lions. At the time of this story, the Roman idea of sport was to watch dangerous chariot races, gladiators fighting duels to the death, wild animals tearing each other to pieces, and the sacrifice of helpless, unarmed people who did not believe in the Roman gods. The Colosseum was a large building in which most of these bloodthirsty shows were staged. There was a great excitement in the Colosseum, for it was known that the Emperor Nero had given orders that some of the condemned Christians should be given to the lions. There was a hush of expectancy as the door of a dungeon was opened, and there entered a procession consisting of a priest of Jupiter and several attendants of the temple, followed by 4 guards conducting an elderly man with his 2 sons, lads of 17 or 18. They made their way across the arena and stopped before the emperor. The priest approached the prisoners, holding out a small image of the god, and offered them their lives if they would worship it. All refused. They were then conducted back to the center of the arena, and the attendants, leaving them there, filed out through the door. The old man laid his hands on the shoulders of his sons and began singing a hymn, in which they both joined. Their voices rose loud and clear in the silence of the amphitheatre, and there was neither pause nor waver in the tone as the entrance to one of the cages at the other end of the arena was opened, and a lion and a lioness appeared. The animals stood hesitating as they looked around at the sea of faces. Then, encouraged by the silence, they stepped out and side by side made the circuit of the arena. When they had completed the circle, they again paused and now, for the first time, turned their attention to the 3 figures standing in its center. For a minute they stood irresolute, and then, crouching low, crawled towards the old man and his sons. The spectators shuddered. Among them was Beric, a brave British lad who had been brought a captive to Rome and had been trained to be a gladiator by Scopas, a noted swordsman. He could view without emotion a contest of armed men, but he could not, like the population of Rome, see unarmed and unresisting men pulled down by wild beasts. There was now a dead silence in the crowded amphitheatre, broken at last by a low sound as of a gasping breath. One voice alone continued the hymn, and soon that too suddenly ceased. The tragedy was over, and the buzz of conversation and comment again broke out among the spectators. Certainly these Christians knew how to die. A strong body of guards, provided with torches, entered. The lions were driven back to their dens. The the bodies being left where they had fallen. Four batches of prisoners who were brought out one after another met with a similar fate. Then there was another pause. It was known that a girl of noble family was to be the last victim. Again the doors opened. A priest of Diana headed a procession of white-robed attendants, and six virgins from the temple of Diana entered, followed by Ennia in the midst of a band of lictors. Even the hardened hearts of the spectators were moved by the youth and beauty of the young girl, who, dressed in white, advanced calmly between her guards, with a gentle, modest expression on her features. When the procession formed up before the emperor, she saluted him. The priests and the virgin surrounded her and urged her to pay reverence to the statue of Diana. Pointing to her parents, they implored her for their sake to recant. Pale as death, and with tears streaming down her cheeks, she shook her head slowly. I cannot deny the Lord who died for me, she said. Nero himself rose from his seat. Maiden, he said, if not for your own sake, then for the sake of those who love you, I pray you to cease from your obstinacy. How can a child like you know more than the wisest heads of Rome? How can you deny the gods who have protected and given victory to your country? I would fain spare you. I am but a child, as you say, Caesar, Ennia replied. I have no strength of my own, but I am strong in the strength of him I worship. He gave his life for me. It is not much that I should give mine for him. Nero sank back in his seat with an angry wave of his hand. He saw that the sympathy of the audience was with the prisoner and would willingly have gained their approval by extending his clemency towards her. The procession now returned to the center of the arena, where the girls weeping took leave of Ennia, who soon stood alone, a slight, helpless figure in the sight of the great silent multitude. Nero had spoken in a low tone to one of his attendants. The door of another cage was opened, and a lion larger than any that had previously entered the arena saluted the spectators with a deep roar. As he did so, a tall figure clad in a tunic sprang forward from a group of attendants behind a strong barrier at the other end of the arena. It was Beric the Briton. He was armed only with a sword which he had snatched from a soldier standing next to him. A burst of applause rose from the spectators. This was a novelty and an excitement beyond what they had bargained for. They had been moved by the youth of the victim, and now the prospect of something more exciting than the rending to pieces of a defenseless girl enlisted them in favor of her champion. Moreover, the Romans intensely admired feats of bravery, and that this captive should offer to face, single-handed, an animal that was known to be the most powerful of those in the amphitheater filled with them with admiration. Accustomed as they were to gaze at athletes, they were struck with the physique and strength of the young Briton, whose muscles stood up massive and knotted through the white skin. Let him fight, they shouted. Let him fight. Nero Nero waited till the acclamation ceased, then ordered the lion to be driven back to its den, and said, "The most have spoken. Let their will be done. But we must not be unfair to the lion. As the maiden was unarmed, so shall you stand unarmed before the lion." This decision was received in silence by the spectators. It seemed a sentence of death to the young Briton, and the silence was succeeded by a low murmur of disapproval. Berwick turned a little pale, but showed no other sign of emotion. "I accept the conditions," he said in a loud, steady voice, "it being you understood that should I conquer, the damsel should be free from all penalty and shall be restored to her parents." "That is understood," Nero replied, with an inclination of his head to the emperor and a wave of his hand to the spectators. Berwick turned and walked across the arena to where his friend Scopas awaited him with a cloak. Wrapping himself in its ample folds, he walked to the center of the arena. A murmur of surprise arose. Why should the Briton cumber his limbs with his garment? Throwing off the cloak, he exclaimed, "You see, I am unarmed. I have not so much as a dagger." Then, tearing off two broad strips from the edge of the garment, he twisted them into ropes and formed a running noose in each. What was left of the cloak he threw over his arm and signed to the attendants at the cage to open the door. "Oh, Berwick, why have you thrown away your life in a useless attempt to save mine?" Enya asked as he stood before her. It may not be useless, Enya. God has protected me through many dangers, and he will surely assist me now. Pray to him for aid." The door of the den opened. Berwick stepped a few paces towards it. The spectators cheered. They had understood his purpose in making the ropes, that he was to use his cloak as the retirees used his net. There was to be a contest then, not a mere slaughter. The lion dashed out of its den and with a sudden spring made 3 or 4 leaps towards and then paused with its eyes fixed on the lad standing in front of it, still and immovable in an easy pose ready for action. Then it sank till its body nearly touched the ground and began to crawl with a stealthy gliding motion towards him. More and more slowly it went till it paused at a distance of some 10 yards. For a few seconds it crouched motionless, save for a slow, wavy movement of its tail. Then, with a sharp roar, it sprang through the air. With a motion as quick, Barry leaped aside. As it touched the ground, he sprang across its loins and wrapped his cloak in many folds round its head, knotting the ends tightly. Then, as the lion, recovering from its first surprise, sprang to its feet with a roar of anger and disgust, Berwick was on his feet beside it. For a moment it strove to tear the strange substance which enveloped its head, but Berwick dropped the end of a noose over one of its forepaws, drew it tight, and with a sudden pull jerked the animal over onto its back. As it sprang up again, the other forepaw was noosed. Forepaw was noosed, and it was again thrown over. This time, as it sprang to its feet, Berwick struck it a heavy blow on the nose. The unexpected assault brought it down for a moment, but mad with rage it sprang up and struck out in all directions at its invisible foe. Leaping and bounding hither and thither, Beric easily avoided the onslaught and, taking every opportunity, struck it 3 or 4 times with all his force on the ear, each time rolling it over and over. The last of these blows seemed to stun it, and it lay for a moment motionless. Again Beric leaped upon it, coming down astride of its loins with all his weight and seizing at once the 2 ropes, the lion uttered a roar of dismay and pain and struck at him first with one paw and then with the other. By the coolness and quickness, however, he escaped all the blows, and when the lion seemed exhausted, he jerked tightly the cords, twisting them behind the lion's back, and with rapid turns fastening them together. The lion was helpless now. As it rolled over and over, uttering roars of vain fury, Beric snatched the cloth from its head, tore off another strip, twisted it, and without difficulty bound its hind legs together. Then he again wrapped it round the lion's head and stood up, breathless but victorious. A mighty shout shook the building. Never had such a fear been seen in the arena before. And men and women rose from their seats and waved their hands in frantic enthusiasm. Beric had not escaped altogether unhurt. As the lion had struck out at him, it had torn away a piece of flesh from his side, and the blood was streaming down over his white tunic. He now went up to Enya, who was standing with closed eyes and hands clasped in prayer. She had been nothing of the conflict. She had seen nothing of the conflict and had believed that Beric's death and her own were inevitable. Enya, he said, God has saved me. The lion is helpless now. And with these words he led her forth from the place that had been for both the very jaws of death. From Beric the Briton by G.A. Henty. That is the end of today's lesson, and that is the end of today's chapter. This is chapter number 27. See you with another exciting chapter, that is chapter number 28. Thank you for listening and thank you for watching. Bye for now.
DJ Academy. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Thanks for watching.